Few TV shows grip an audience the way Breaking Bad did. The unique concept, raw character portrayals, and perfect writing all contribute to it being the highest rated TV show of all time. But beyond Walter White building his blue candy empire and Hank collecting rocks, one character stands out from everyone else in terms of emotional impact, and that character is of course Jesse Pinkman. Between his days as a low-level street dealer and his eventual escape to Alaska, he endured more trauma, manipulation, and loss than anyone should ever have to handle. So why didn't he leave sooner? Why couldn't Jesse take his money and start over years earlier? Was it loyalty? Fear? Guilt? Let's find out. Our first introduction to Jesse Pinkman is brief, chaotic, and incredibly effective in setting the stage for who he is. As Hank and his team close in for a major drug bust, Jesse makes his big escape. We see him tumbling off a rooftop, then suffering a slight panic attack after making eye contact with Walter, before speeding off in his car. This introduction, while less than a minute long and with Jesse not saying a single word, is brilliant. At first glance, it makes Jesse seem like a one-dimensional character, someone reckless, clumsy, and unserious. Qualities that make it easy for Walt, Hank, and the audience to underestimate him. And in many ways, that judgment isn't entirely wrong. Throughout the early seasons, Jesse is often portrayed as someone lacking common sense, the kind of person you would be embarrassed to be around. But as the series unfolds, it becomes more and more clear that the introduction was a misdirection. We slowly realize that Jesse is one of, if not the, most emotionally rich and resourceful character in the series. By framing his introduction as chaotic and almost comical, the writers make his later depth feel even more earned. If he had been introduced as an obviously layered and sympathetic character from the start, the impact of his transformation wouldn't have been as powerful. The contrast between his reckless beginnings and his eventual struggles with morality, guilt, and self-destruction makes his character arc far more compelling. Even though Jesse is initially presented as a one-dimensional slacker who is mostly interested in partying, drugs, and quick money, I do have to add that there are some signs early on in the show that subtly show his emotional depth and intelligence. When visiting his parents' house in Season 1, Episode 4, we see Jesse making a genuine attempt at connecting with his little brother, Jake. He wants to teach him things, in his own unique way, that Jake clearly shows no interest in, but still, it's the intention that counts. And when Jake's contraband gets found, Jesse doesn't hesitate to take the blame. This speaks volumes on Jesse's good nature. Despite being treated as the black sheep of the family, while Jake is seen as the golden child, Jesse doesn't lash out in jealousy. Instead, he quietly protects his little brother, revealing two key things about his character. First, it shows a level of selflessness we wouldn't expect from him before. And second, it proves that he understands where the real issue lies. Not with Jake, but with his fractured relationship with his parents. The fact that Jesse recognizes this dynamic, rather than resenting his brother, speaks to an emotional intelligence that can easily go unnoticed. Another moment I want to note is episode 5, when Jesse starts cooking on his own. After finishing his batch, he gets frustrated with the quality and proceeds to throw it out. This scene strongly suggests that Jesse isn't dumb, he's simply uneducated and lacks discipline. But when he applies himself, he has real potential. This is an early glimpse of that sharp, inventive mind we see more of later. Even though Jesse's caring nature is well established within the first few episodes, it's quickly becoming more clear that there's more beneath the surface. He keeps finding himself in dangerous situations, and negativity followed him from the beginning until the end. So how does this naive but good-hearted kid with clear potential find himself in this environment? And why can he just not get out? Like I said at the start of the video, Jesse had money, even people offering him a way out. And yet time and time again he stayed, only to get dragged deeper into the mud. Why? At a certain point, you can't just chalk this pattern up to bad decision making. What's most likely happening here is something known as trauma bonding. Trauma bonding happens when someone forms an unhealthy attachment to their abuser. It's why people stay in toxic relationships, why they defend the very person hurting them, and why Jesse kept running back to Walter. From the very start, Walt wasn't just a business partner, he was a twisted father figure. Jesse's relationship with his own parents was already fractured at the start of the show, and it's understandable why they would set boundaries. No parents want to enable their child's destructive behavior. But to his parents, Jesse wasn't just troubled, he was a lost cause. Instead of guiding him, they pushed him away, keeping control through distance. Walt did the opposite. He pulled Jesse in, gaining control through dependency. So, one rejected him, the other weaponized his need to be accepted. That's what made Jesse so vulnerable to Walter. Walt didn't just manipulate him, he filled a void Jesse had been carrying for a long time. There's something interesting about these dynamics. They're almost always built on a cycle of reward and punishment, and we can see this very clearly in the relationship between the two. One moment Walt is saving Jesse's life, the next he's emotionally torturing him.
You don't know. You know why you don't know? Because you don't think. That's why. You don't think. You never figured out how to think.
He gives Jesse just enough kindness to keep him hooked, only to rip it away when Jesse starts slipping out of his control. The clearest example is of course Jane's death. Walt lets Jane die right in front of Jesse, one of the most horrific betrayals imaginable. But instead of walking away, Jesse falls deeper into addiction, guilt, and self-loathing. And when Jesse is at his lowest, who's the one to save him? Walt. The abuser becomes both the cause of the pain and the only person who can relieve it. So every time Jesse tried to leave, it didn't feel like breaking free. It felt like losing the only person who ever truly cared about him. And that's exactly how Walt wanted it. Even if Jesse had never met Walter, he still would have likely ended up in the same kind of dynamic with someone else. Because the human mind doesn't automatically seek what's healthy, it seeks what's familiar. Familiarity gives us a sense of predictability, and predictability feels like safety, even when it's clearly not. Jesse spent his entire life being rejected, overlooked, and abandoned. He learned that pain is just part of the deal, that love is something you have to earn. That if you try hard enough, if you give enough of yourself, maybe this time you won't be left behind. That belief trapped Jesse in a cycle of abuse, one that didn't start with Walt, but one that Walt exploited perfectly. And Jesse isn't alone in this. This exact pattern plays out in abusive relationships all the time, and it's something that Jesse had already been conditioned to fall into. This cycle of abuse has 4 different stages that keep showing up in a pattern. Starting with tension building. Jesse is constantly walking on eggshells. With his parents, he was the screw-up, the disappointment. No matter how hard he tried to prove himself, he always felt like he was one mistake away from being completely cut off. With Walt, it's exactly the same thing. He knows how quickly Walt can turn on him, how easy it is to set him off. So he starts anticipating Walt's moods, trying to avoid the landmines before they go off. And the show makes you feel this. Jesse's entire presence radiates that anxiety. The way he hesitates before speaking, the way his expression shifts the second he realizes he said something wrong. You don't need the show to spell it out. It's just there, in every moment he shares with Walt. It's a constant reminder that Jesse isn't just caught up in a bad relationship, he's trapped in a life that he needs to get out of. And just like with his parents, Jesse convinces himself that it's his fault, that if he were just smarter, stronger, better, maybe he could finally earn the approval he's been chasing his entire life. But of course, he never does. Because someone with a manipulative nature like Walter doesn't want you to feel secure, they want you to feel dependent. After tension building, eventually comes the breaking point. This is the explosion, the moment everything boils over. Sometimes it's physical, like when Walt literally beats Jesse to the ground. Other times it's psychological, the manipulation, the humiliation, the way Walt strips Jesse down until there's nothing left. One of the worst examples happens in season 4. Jesse has finally found a place where he feels needed, working for Gus. And for the first time, he's being treated like an equal. He's respected, valued. So what does Walt do? He destroys it. He drags Jesse back into his orbit by making him believe Gus is manipulating him, that he's just another pawn being used. Walt doesn't do this because he cares about Jesse, he does it because he can't stand seeing Jesse thrive without him. And the worst part? It works. Because Jesse has been conditioned to believe that love and pain go hand in hand, that suffering is just part of the price you pay to keep someone in your life, which leads into stage 3, false hope. This is the part that keeps people trapped, the moment where you convince yourself, maybe this time it will be different. With his parents, it was, maybe if I clean up, they'll finally accept me. With Jane, it was, maybe we can escape and start over. With Walter, it was the illusion that he actually cared. Every time Jesse reaches his breaking point, he convinces himself things will change. And every time he's proven wrong. Misplaced hope isn't just harmless optimism, it's what keeps him stuck. It makes him ignore reality, believe in people who don't deserve it, and stay in situations that are only getting worse. And time after time, it pulls him back in. The fourth and final stage of the cycle of abuse is known as calm, which we're not going to talk about because that doesn't really happen in Breaking Bad. By the time El Camino begins, Jesse has already endured more suffering than any normal person could ever fathom. There's something different about him though. The Jesse that we saw so much of throughout the show is gone. Unlike before, there's no illusion left. No false hope of a father figure looking out for him. No guilt tying him to a life he thinks he deserves. No reason to believe that staying will ever lead to anything but more pain. The conditioning that once kept him trapped, seeking approval, carrying guilt, clinging to attachments that only hurt him, has been completely erased. For the longest time, Jesse was driven by a need to make things right. Whether it was proving himself to Walt, taking care of Jane, avenging Brock, or throwing away his drug money because he thought he didn't deserve it, his choices always stemmed from the belief that he was responsible for the damage around him, and that belief was exactly what kept him chained. Because as long as Jesse felt accountable for the messes he found himself in, he would never truly let go of them. But El Camino forces him into a different reality. There's no one left to save, no one left to answer to. Just Jesse, standing at the edge of what would finally be a new life, if he's willing to take it. And for the first time he does. This is what, in my eyes, make the final moments of El Camino so satisfying. In his first escape at the end of Breaking Bad, Jesse is still running, screaming, desperate, wild with the relief of escaping immediate danger. But in El Camino, when we see him drive off for the last time, he's not running anymore. He's leaving. The restless anxiety that followed him throughout the entire series is gone. There's no frantic energy, no hesitation, no looking over his shoulder. Instead, there's something we've never truly seen from Jesse before. Acceptance. He's not looking for redemption anymore, because he finally understands that he never needed to be redeemed. He's not carrying the weight of his past, because he finally sees that it was never his burden to bear. For the first time, Jesse Pinkman is free.